Hey everyone, Doug here with B&H. Today we're looking at the latest entry in Sony's cinema line of cameras, the FX3. It's a kind of best of both worlds approach, bringing full-frame cinematography into a compact form factor. Now, it may look like one of Sony's own alpha still cameras, but looks can be deceiving. The FX3 takes a much different approach in usability and ergonomics that makes it sit alongside its cinematic brethren, the FX6 and FX9. The camera is largely video-centric, supporting full-frame 4K capture up to 120 FPS, all in 10-bit 422, but it also maintains the ability to take beautifully detailed still photos, especially in low light. As part of the cinema line, the FX3 is a great option for someone looking to get into full-frame cinematography, especially if you're upgrading from a mirrorless stills camera already. But it could also be a fantastic B camera for users of Sony's cinema line. If we're going to start anywhere with the FX3, it should be the body and the overall design of the camera. Built for rugged, professional use, the outside of the body features the same finish found on the FX6 and the FX9. But you've probably noticed the most obvious features on the top of the camera. No EVF and 3 quarter-20 threads. There's actually 5 of them around the camera, excluding the normal tripod thread that's on the bottom, and that's because the FX3 seeks to provide the same compact cinematography experience that many of us have now become accustomed to in mirrorless cameras, but without the need to rig it up with a bulky cage to attach accessories or protect the camera body. This, of course, is advantageous in tight, handheld shooting environments where you might need a slimmer camera rig or where a cage might simply be too intrusive. Accessories like monitor arms can be attached directly to multiple points on the FX3's body. Not only does this reduce the size of your camera setup, but it also makes it much faster to build out. Now, while the EVF has been removed, the FX3 makes use of this reclaimed space by providing a top-handle grip for the camera that includes an XLR/TRS audio adapter on the top. This adapter handle combo is actually included with the camera and attaches directly to the FX3's multi-interface shoe. Built-in screws secure the handle in place to the body, no tools required, and it provides excellent handheld grip for low-angle or handheld shots. Just so you're aware, the audio adapter is not removable from the handle, but it can be turned off. There's several other features of the FX3 that tailor it to video and cinema capture. The controls are really interesting because they're sort of a reconfiguration of still image controls in a way that makes them similar to the grips you would find on a cinema camera. Most of the controls are on the right side, and the big surprise here is a zoom dial. If you're using an FZ lens, for example, which have their own mount-powered zoom motor, the FX3 can control it from the dial. That functionality alone is huge for run-and-gun capture in particular. There are 3 dials on the camera for exposure control, with most of the buttons to access those functions located up on the top. The AF point joystick, which is typically seen on the back side of the camera, is now on the top. And that really works out well here because your thumb can naturally move on the back side to the focus magnification button. You'll notice that the standard 4-way directional wheel on the back is labeled more for video use. The main display, peaking, and zebras can all be toggled through the wheel, and the function button directly above it can access the quick menu, which we'll get to later. Yes, there is a flip-out LCD screen here, which protrudes slightly out from the body. This is because behind the LCD is an active cooling system which keeps the camera cool for extended shooting periods. Before we look at some footage, just know that in true video camera fashion, we have record buttons on both the top and the front of the camera. Plus, there's even a tally light on the back to indicate recording. So how's the footage look? Well, the FX3 doesn't really leave anything out when it comes to recording. You can shoot unlimited 4K footage up to 60 FPS and up to 120 FPS with a 10% crop, which is still pretty impressive. All formats can shoot in 10-bit 422, meaning you'll get smooth gradients and more flexibility in your color grade. Video quality here is detailed and razor sharp, with the camera providing healthy codec options across the board. XAVC-HS, which is Sony's HEVC implementation, is here with a maximum bitrate of 200 megabits per second at 24 or 60 FPS, or 280 megabits at 120 FPS. You can even shoot in H.264 all-intra mode, allowing for 600 megabits per second up to 60 FPS. Slow and quick motion is supported, but for scratch audio reasons, I personally prefer to shoot up to 120 FPS natively. S&Q mode is useful, however, if you want to shoot all the way up to 240 FPS in 1080p. The sensor can capture a gorgeous 15 stops of dynamic range, and along with Sony's other most recent cameras, also supports S-Log2 and 3 to maximize what you capture in post. There's also HLG HDR support and, in keeping true to the cinema line, S-Cinetone. Everything you see here has been captured in S-Cinetone, and I'll continue to say it. It's a great option for quick delivery with no real need for grading beyond simple contrast adjustments. We've had a ton of snow here in New York recently, but even with the challenging highlights that brings, roll-off is pleasing even in the slightly overexposed areas, and the contrast never feels artificially low in doing so. Now, it wouldn't be a Sony camera without some talk about the autofocus. AF is excellent on the FX3 with incredibly fast response even when recording. There are 627 PDAF points covering 89% of the frame, and Sony's real-time IAF returns here as well, with support for humans and animals. The AF here is ridiculously responsive, and you can see here in this shot how quickly the focus shifts as cars move in and out of frame. Of course, in reality, you wouldn't want it to do that, but it can. Touch to focus is fantastic here, and I rarely found the camera to have trouble picking up where I was tapping, even against tricky foregrounds like this fence. Even in low light situations such as the one here, touch to focus combined with the camera's excellent AF tracking works brilliantly for elegant rack focus effects, even in motion. For difficult subjects, or to simply ensure that nothing changes the camera's focus, the reworking of the AF joystick and zoom magnification buttons that I mentioned before should keep your shots sharp. And as you can see here, rolling shutter isn't a problem on the FX3, with readout speed that's easily able to keep up with a moving train. Since the FX3 has a relatively low 10.2 megapixel sensor, low light performance is amazing. But I gotta admit, it's really funny to say this, but low light performance like this is becoming so common now, especially on Sony's most recent cameras, that short of a pitch black room, there's very little you won't be able to expose for with this camera. Check this out. Can you see anything here at ISO 400? Maybe 2500? Okay, here we are at 12,800. This is nothing more than the ambient light of my TV. Let's go even higher, at 25,600, where we finally get a decent exposure. The FX3 is shockingly clean up to ISO 12,800, and I would feel comfortable going up to 25,600 if necessary. Just because we can, here's the same shot at 51,200. 102,400, which is the standard maximum, and 409,600, which is the extended maximum. One more thing. While it should be no surprise that the full-size HDMI output of the FX3 is clean, the camera is also capable of 16-bit RAW output over HDMI. RAW output goes up to 4K 60p and provides the highest quality signal from the camera. So, given the different approach the FX3 takes to its design, how is it in the field? Well, for starters, running around in the snow is a lot easier with the top handle. I took the camera out with the FE 24-105 f4 lens in order to make the kit as all-in-one as possible. And as far as overall feel and weight were concerned, it was easy to move around at only 1.41 pounds. The weatherproof ceiling came in handy too, as I was shooting underneath dripping icicles more than a few times. There's a lot to the design that we only touched upon earlier that really helps when shooting on the FX3. Here's one of my favorite things. The exposure control buttons for iris, white balance, and ISO provide a lock function. Simply long press ISO, for example, and you can lock ISO changes, which is incredibly helpful on a smaller body such as this, where you might accidentally change settings, or when you shift grip from the camera body to the top handle. And although I didn't use the top handle's XLR audio, users will like to know that the unit allows for 4-channel 24-bit recording and can be connected to the provided ECM XM1 shotgun microphone, while the camera also records its own scratch track. While we already mentioned the top handle's position in place of an EVF, this also means that mode and AF dials have been removed. The power switch and mode button are instead located right above the LCD screen. This does mean that modes require menu operation rather than a physical dial, Though since this is primarily a video camera, I didn't find myself reaching for the mode dial at all. Sony's recent trend of using combination CF Express Type A and SDXC slots returns here on the FX3, and the good news is that SDXC cards can be used for almost every format here except the 600 megabit all-intra mode, which needs the higher speeds of the CF Express cards. The FX3 really shines with power. While we didn't do a full battery drain to test recording time, Sony claims a 1.6 times longer recording time in terms of battery use when compared to the Alpha 7S III. For those who do need even longer runtimes though, the camera supports USB-C power delivery, so you can either power or charge the camera through the connector. With all the quarter 20 threads available around the camera, accessories like external monitors are much easier to set up than other cameras of this size. It makes sense that this is pretty reminiscent of how you would add a monitor arm to, say, the FX6, where there are quarter 20 threads on the top of the body. By the way, you've probably noticed that the top handle automatically occupies 2 of the camera's threads, but it makes up for this by providing its own additional threads, 2 on the top of the handle and 1 on the rear. About the only thing missing here is an electronic ND filter. But in return, you do get 5-axis in-body image stabilization. One thing I want to mention about stabilization is that while I don't normally use the stabilizer's active mode, as it's called, I tried it out in the FX3 in conjunction with the top handle, which lends itself to handheld low-angle shooting. The active stabilizer worked wonders in countering the treacherous footsteps of handheld shooting in the snow. Try it, please. By the way, like the FX6 and FX9, this camera also supports metadata-based stabilization in post by way of Sony's Catalyst browser software. The FX3 has a lot going for it if you're mostly dedicated to video production and cinematography. But the interesting thing is that it still retains the ability to take a still image since the camera does have a focal plane shutter. Now, these are only 10.2 megapixel stills, but with silent shooting options, remote control, wireless FTP photo transfer, and perhaps most advantageously, the FX3's low light performance, the camera can double as a still camera when you need it. Another thing viewers should consider is that the top handle XLR accessory is included with the FX3, meaning no additional purchases are necessary to get XLR or TRS audio into the camera. The additional audio channels means you have more flexible recording options as well, which is useful for situations where you may need audio from multiple sources, like say an audio mixer or an alternative microphone. The FX3 is a surprising entry in the cinema line, but it's awesome to see the marriage of cinematography, ergonomics, and functionality to the smaller size of a mirrorless still camera. With the color profile and codec options to match its bigger siblings, it could also serve as a B camera to those on productions where those cameras might not be able to grab the shot. And its multiple threading points makes compact rigs much more realistic. So that's it for the Sony FX3. I'm Doug with B&H, and I'll see you next time.